I'm Cassandra Sullivan, Cassie to everyone except my mother Elizabeth. I was 28 when my perfect engagement party turned into a nightmare. That evening, standing in my cream silk dress beside my fiancé Nathan, I noticed Mom approaching with 2 wine glasses. She handed me the red one with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something seemed off. The wine smelled strange, almost medicinal. In a split-second decision that would change everything, I swapped glasses with my sister Allie when she wasn't looking. Before continuing my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had that gut feeling that something just wasn't right. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. To understand why I'd be suspicious of a glass of wine from my own mother, you need to know our history. I grew up in a picturesque colonial home in Portland, the kind that looks perfect in family Christmas cards. But behind that pristine facade was a household ruled by my mother's impossible standards. Elizabeth Sullivan was the quintessential perfectionist. Every detail of our lives was meticulously controlled, from the clothes we wore to the friends we made. My father Harold, a successful accountant, retreated into his work rather than challenge her iron rule. He was physically present, but emotionally absent, a spectator to my mother's controlling behavior. Cassandra, sit up straight. No one wants a slouching daughter, she'd say at dinner parties. Cassandra, that outfit makes you look heavy. Go change. Cassandra, B+ isn't good enough for college applications. Her criticism was constant, delivered with a smile that fooled everyone but me. My sister Allison Allie was 3 years younger and somehow exempt from Mom's exacting standards. Where I received criticism, Allie received praise. My straight A's were expected, her BS were celebrated. My piano recitals were critiqued, her soccer games were events where Mom cheered enthusiastically from the sidelines. Why can't you be more like your sister? Became a recurring theme. Allie knows how to present herself. Allie understands what's appropriate. It wasn't Allie's fault, she was just as trapped in Mom's dysfunctional dynamics as I was, just on the opposite end of the spectrum. By 16, I'd developed anxiety that manifested in perfectionism that rivaled my mother's. I straightened my naturally curly hair because Mom said it looked unprofessional. I abandoned my passion for photography because it wasn't a serious career path. I dated boys Mom approved of, usually sons of her country club friends, despite feeling nothing for them. College was my escape. I applied to journalism programs across the country, landing at Northwestern, far enough from Portland that surprise visits weren't possible. Those 4 years were transformative. I made real friends like Madison and Heather who liked me for me. I let my curls grow back. I pursued photography alongside my journalism major. I discovered who Cassie Sullivan was without Elizabeth Sullivan's running commentary. After graduation, I landed a job at a digital media company in Chicago. I was writing articles about things that mattered, taking photos that told stories, and building a life that felt authentically mine. At 26, I met Nathan Thompson at a coffee shop near my office. He spilled coffee on my laptop, insisted on buying me a new one, and somehow turned a disaster into our first date. Nathan was everything I never knew I needed: steady, kind, creative in his work as an architect, and completely unthreatened by my success. After 2 years together, he proposed on the Chicago waterfront with a vintage emerald ring that showed how well he knew me. When I called my parents with the news, Dad offered genuine congratulations. Mom's response was tellingly lukewarm. An emerald? How unconventional. I suppose diamonds are rather common these days. Despite Nathan's successful career at a prestigious architecture firm, despite his loving family and our obvious happiness, Mom found ways to express her disapproval. An architect? I suppose that's stable enough. Thompson? Is that English or Scottish? Chicago is so far from family, Cassandra. Planning the wedding meant navigating the minefield of family dynamics I'd escaped years ago. Nathan encouraged me to consider eloping, sensing my stress, but some part of me still wanted my family's blessing. So when Mom insisted on hosting our engagement party, I reluctantly agreed. Nothing elaborate, I told her on the phone. Just close friends and family. Of course, Cassandra, she replied in that tone I knew too well. I understand completely. Within weeks, she'd booked Portland's most exclusive venue, created an elaborate guest list, and begun micromanaging every detail from 3 states away. Nathan watched with growing concern as each phone call left me more anxious. Even Allie, now married to her college sweetheart James and living in Seattle, texted warnings. Mom's gone full momzilla over your party. Brace yourself. I should have listened to them all. I should have trusted my instincts. But some childish part of me still wanted to believe that this time would be different, that my engagement might finally be the thing that earned my mother's unconditional approval. How wrong I was. The Westbrook Hotel's grand ballroom was Elizabeth Sullivan's idea of nothing elaborate crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Portland's skyline, and floral arrangements that must have cost more than my monthly rent. When Nathan and I arrived for our supposedly intimate gathering, at least 70 people were already mingling. Your mother's outdone herself, Nathan whispered, squeezing my hand supportively. He looked handsome in his navy suit, his dark hair freshly cut, brown eyes concerned behind his glasses. We can leave any time you want. Just say the word. I smoothed down my cream silk dress, one I'd chosen myself despite Mom's hints about a more flattering option she'd found. It'll be fine, I said, trying to convince myself. Just a few hours, then it's over. Madison and Heather had flown in from Chicago, and seeing their familiar faces among the crowd of my mother's country club friends was a relief. They hugged me fiercely, forming a protective barrier as we caught up. That woman at 3 o'clock hasn't stopped staring at you since we arrived, Madison murmured. Let me guess, your mom? I nodded, watching Elizabeth make her way toward us. At 58, she remained striking, tall and slender with perfectly highlighted hair, and the kind of polished appearance that came from decades of careful maintenance. Cassandra, there you are. You're nearly 30 minutes late. She air-kissed my cheeks, her perfume expensively subtle. And this dress, well, you've always had your own sense of style. She turned to Madison and Heather with a practiced smile. College friends, I presume? How lovely you could make the trip. Before they could respond, she'd already moved on, pulling me toward a group of her friends. Everyone's been asking about you. The Brighton's son Michael is here, you remember him? Divorced now, such a shame. Nathan rescued me 20 minutes later, bringing his parents Thomas and Catherine Thompson with him. Unlike my mother's cool assessment, Catherine embraced me warmly. We're so thrilled you'll be joining our family, she said, her eyes crinkling with genuine pleasure. Thomas, a retired engineer with Nathan's same thoughtful manner, shook my hand with both of his. Our son's never been happier, he said simply. The contrast between the Thompsons' straightforward affection and my mother's complicated expectations wasn't lost on me. I caught Nathan watching the difference too, his expression a mix of sympathy and love. Allie and James arrived an hour into the party. My sister looked stunning as always, her blonde hair, Mom's natural color before the highlighting began, falling in perfect waves, her blue dress, Mom approved, I was certain, complimenting her eyes. James couldn't keep his hands off her, his arm perpetually around her waist as they moved through the crowd. Cassie. Allie broke away to hug me. This is insane, right? Mom said it would be small. When has Mom ever done anything small? I laughed, genuinely happy to see her. Fair point. How are you holding up? Before I could answer, Mom appeared between us. Allison, darling, you look beautiful. That color is perfect with your complexion. She turned to me. Cassandra, the caterers need direction about the timing for the toast. I told them you'd want to handle it personally. I hadn't planned a toast, hadn't planned any of this, really, but I nodded. Sure, Mom. As she led me toward the catering staff, I overheard her murmuring to Allie, Try to convince your sister to put some lipstick on before the photos, won't you? The party progressed with the polished veneer of perfection that characterized all Elizabeth Sullivan events. I circulated among guests I barely knew, accepted congratulations from my parents' friends, and tried to keep Nathan within arm's reach for moral support. An hour before the party was scheduled to end, I spotted Mom and Dad in what appeared to be a tense conversation near the bar. Dad looked unusually animated, shaking his head firmly, while Mom's expression grew increasingly rigid. When she noticed me watching, she immediately transformed her face into a pleasant smile and said something that made Dad walk away. "Everything okay?" I asked when she approached. "Of course, dear. Your father's just being difficult about the toast." She patted my arm. "I've decided we should do it now, before people start leaving. I've asked the staff to prepare something special." She signaled to a waiter, who began distributing champagne flutes. I found Nathan, and we moved to the center of the room. Dad appeared at Mom's side, looking uncomfortable but resigned. Allie and James joined us, completing the family picture. Mom raised her hand, and the room quieted. "We're so delighted you could all join us to celebrate Cassandra and Nathan's engagement," she began, her voice carrying perfectly. "Harold and I couldn't be prouder." Dad nodded stiffly beside her. I felt Nathan's hand tighten around mine. "Before Harold gives the official toast," Mom continued, though this was clearly news to Dad, "I wanted to offer a special toast just for our immediate family." She turned to a server who carried a tray with 5 glasses, 4 champagne flutes, and 1 glass of red wine. "Champagne gives Cassandra headaches," Mom explained to the puzzled looks, though this wasn't true. I'd never had a champagne headache in my life. "So I've selected a special vintage for her." She handed the wine to me with that strange smile, lips curved but eyes watchful, almost anticipatory. The flutes went to Nathan, Dad, Allie, and James. I stared at the dark liquid, suddenly uneasy. The wine's color seemed normal, but when I lifted it to my nose, something smelled off. Not just corked, but wrong. There was an underlying medicinal scent beneath the familiar grape and oak notes. Mom was watching me intently. "A toast," she said, raising her flute. "To new beginnings." Everyone lifted their glasses. In that split second, I made a decision that would change everything. As Allie turned to whisper something to James, I smoothly switched our glasses, placing the champagne flute in my hand and the wine glass in hers. "To new beginnings," we all echoed. Allie, distracted by James, didn't notice the switch. She sipped the red wine as I drank the champagne, feeling my mother's eyes on me the entire time. For the next half hour, the party continued normally. I mingled with guests, posed for photos, and tried to ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Every few minutes, I'd catch Mom watching me with a puzzled expression, as if waiting for something that wasn't happening. Nathan and I were speaking with his parents when I noticed a commotion across the room. James was supporting Allie, who seemed unsteady on her feet. At first, I thought she might have had too much to drink, but Allie rarely had more than 1 glass of anything. "Excuse me," I said to the Thompsons, already moving toward my sister. Nathan followed close behind. By the time we reached them, Allie's condition had visibly worsened. Her words slurred together as she tried to tell James she felt strange. Her eyes couldn't seem to focus, and a thin sheen of sweat had broken out across her forehead despite the room's cool temperature. "Something's wrong," James said, alarm clear in his voice. "She's only had that 1 glass of wine and maybe half a glass of water." Mom appeared beside us, her face showing what seemed like genuine shock. "What's happening? Is Allison all right?" Before anyone could answer, Allie lurched forward. "Bathroom," she managed to say. I immediately took her other arm, and together James and I guided her through the now-watching crowd toward the ladies' room. We barely made it inside before Allie collapsed to her knees in front of a toilet, violently ill. I held her hair back, exchanging worried glances with James, who hovered anxiously in the doorway. This isn't normal, I said as Ali continued retching. This isn't just alcohol. I'm calling 911, James decided, pulling out his phone. Ali's condition deteriorated rapidly. Between bouts of sickness, she complained of dizziness and numbness in her extremities. By the time the paramedics arrived, she was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. The elegant engagement party dissolved into chaos. Guests were ushered out as the medical team worked on Ali. They asked rapid-fire questions. What had she consumed? Did she have any allergies? Was she on medication? James answered what he could, but when they asked specifically about the wine, I felt a cold realization wash over me. The wine, I said quietly to Nathan as they loaded Ali onto a stretcher. It was meant for me. I switched our glasses because it smelled strange. Nathan's face paled. Are you saying? I don't know what I'm saying, I interrupted, not ready to voice my suspicions. But something's very wrong. Mom insisted on riding in the ambulance with Ali and James. Dad followed in his car, looking shell-shocked. Nathan drove me to the hospital, neither of us speaking much during the journey. My mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. What exactly did you smell in the wine? Nathan finally asked as we parked. Something medicinal. Like cough syrup, but sharper. I turned to him, fear evident in my voice. Nathan, who would want to drug me at my own engagement party? The question hung between us, neither willing to voice the answer that was becoming increasingly clear. The hospital waiting room was a tableau of family tension. Dad paced nervously while Mom sat perfectly still, her posture rigid, hands clasped tightly in her lap. James stood by the doorway, alternating between checking his phone and asking the nurses for updates. Nathan and I sat slightly apart from my parents, his arm around my shoulders. Family of Allison Brooks? A doctor finally called. We all stood. The doctor explained that Ali had been drugged. Tests showed a significant amount of sedatives in her system, along with another substance they were still identifying. The combination had caused her adverse reaction. Had she taken any medication today? Anything that might have interacted with alcohol? The doctor asked. No, nothing, James answered firmly. Ali doesn't even take aspirin unless she absolutely has to. Then I'm afraid we're looking at a potential case of intentional drugging, the doctor said gravely. We've already notified the police. Mom let out a small gasp. Dad placed his hand on her shoulder, his expression unreadable. 2 police officers arrived shortly after, taking preliminary statements from everyone. I sat with Nathan, watching the family drama unfold with a growing sense of dread. The pieces were coming together in a pattern I didn't want to acknowledge. I need to tell them, I whispered to Nathan after the officers had spoken with my parents. About switching the glasses. Nathan nodded gravely. I think you do. When the officers approached us, I took a deep breath and told them everything, the strange wine, the odd smell, my split-second decision to swap glasses with Ali. I watched their expressions shift from routine questioning to serious concern. And why did you feel the need to swap glasses, Miss Sullivan? The female officer asked. I hesitated, aware of my parents within earshot. Instinct, I guess. Something felt wrong. Did you have any reason to believe someone might want to harm you? Again, I paused. Not specifically, no. Nathan squeezed my hand. Tell them your concerns, Cassie. The officers looked at me expectantly. I lowered my voice. The wine came directly from my mother. She specifically brought it for me, saying I get headaches from champagne, which isn't true. And she'd been acting strangely all night. The male officer glanced over at my mother, who was now speaking intently with Dad. We'll need to investigate this further. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement? I nodded, feeling like I was crossing a line I could never retreat back over. While the police spoke with hospital staff, I pulled Dad aside to a quiet corner of the waiting room. Dad, I need to know the truth. What's been going on with Mom? His face seemed to age years in seconds. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. Cassie, your mother hasn't been herself lately. She's been fixated on your engagement in ways that aren't healthy. What does that mean? She's been saying things about Nathan not being right for you, about how you're making a mistake. He looked away. I thought it was just her being controlling as usual. I never imagined she'd. He couldn't finish the sentence. Has she seen anyone? A therapist. Dad laughed bitterly. You know your mother. Therapy is for other people who can't handle their problems. I've suggested it for years. Our conversation was interrupted when James called out that Allie was awake and asking for family. As we all moved toward her room, a police officer stopped Mom. Mrs. Sullivan, we'd like to ask you a few more questions. Mom's face remained composed, but I caught the flicker of panic in her eyes. Of course, officer. Though I don't see how I can help. This is all just a terrible misunderstanding. While she spoke with police, the rest of us entered Allie's room. My sister looked frighteningly pale against the white hospital sheets and 4 dripping fluids into her arm. James immediately went to her side, taking her hand. What happened? Allie asked weakly. I exchanged glances with Dad, unsure how much to say. Before either of us could respond, a nurse entered with a police officer. We need to check Mrs. Sullivan's personal belongings, the officer explained. Standard procedure in cases like this. Mom's purse sat on a chair where she'd left it before being taken for questioning. The officer put on gloves and carefully opened it, cataloging the contents. Among the expected items, wallet, phone, makeup, was a small leather-bound book. What's that? I asked. Appears to be a diary, the officer said, bagging it as potential evidence. A diary? I'd never known my mother to keep one. The discovery felt ominous, like finding a snake hidden in a flower arrangement. As the officer left with the bagged items, I turned back to Allie, who was watching me with confused eyes. Cassie, did you switch our drinks? She asked quietly. The directness of her question stunned me into silence. In that moment, I realized there was no going back. The truth was emerging whether I was ready or not. The hospital waiting room became our family's temporary headquarters as we waited for updates on Allie's condition and the police investigation. Nathan's parents had arrived, providing a steady, calm presence that contrasted sharply with the Sullivan family chaos. Thomas Thompson brought coffee for everyone, his kindness highlighting how rare such simple gestures were in my family. Catherine sat beside me, occasionally patting my hand without demanding explanations or offering unwanted advice. The doctor confirmed it was a mix of sedatives and something they're still identifying, James announced, returning from speaking with medical staff. They're keeping her overnight for observation, but she should recover fully. Relief washed over us, followed quickly by the grim reality of why we were there. 2 detectives had replaced the uniformed officers, and they were now interviewing each of us separately in a small consultation room. When it was my turn, I repeated my story. The strange whine, the impulsive switch, the growing suspicion that my mother had intended to drug me. Can you think of any reason your mother would want to incapacitate you, Ms. Sullivan? The female detective asked. She's always been controlling, I replied, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined. We found this in your mother's purse, the male detective said, sliding a photocopy across the table. It was a page from Mom's diary, dated just 3 days earlier. Cassandra continues with this ridiculous engagement. Nathan is completely wrong for her, too soft, too accommodating of her independence. If the party doesn't change her mind, more direct measures may be necessary. Harold is useless as always. I stared at the words written in my mother's elegant script. They confirmed my worst fears while raising new questions. There's more, the detective continued. Earlier entries suggest your mother has been planning to disrupt your engagement for months. Some entries mention specific drugs she researched online. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Has she been arrested? Not yet. We're building our case. Your sister's toxicology report will be crucial evidence. When I returned to the waiting room, Nathan immediately wrapped his arm around me. What did they say? I showed him the diary photocopy. His face darkened as he read it. Cassie, this is serious. Your mother needs help, professional help. I know, I whispered. I just can't believe she'd go this far. Dad was interviewed next. When he returned, his face was ashen. He sank into a chair across from me, looking suddenly old and defeated. Did you know? I asked him directly. About what Mom was planning? No, he said, his voice cracking. But I knew she wasn't well. I've known for years, Cassie, and I did nothing. I just adapted around her behaviors. Made excuses. He covered his face with his hands. This is my fault too. Mr. Sullivan, Nathan said carefully, Elizabeth needs psychiatric help. This goes beyond controlling behavior. Dad nodded, tears in his eyes. They showed me the diary. There were things in there. He trailed off. Things about all of us. Her resentment toward you, Cassie, for escaping her influence. Her fixation on Allie as the good daughter. Her contempt for me. He looked up at me. I'm so sorry. I failed you girls. The police had taken Mom to the station for formal questioning. James had returned to Allie's room, leaving Nathan, my father, and me to process what was happening. I need to see Allie, I said finally. Dad nodded. She's asked for you. When I entered Allie's room, James tactfully stepped out to give us privacy. My sister looked better. Some color had returned to her cheeks, though she still appeared exhausted. Is it true? She asked immediately. Did Mom try to drug you and I got it instead? I sat beside her bed, taking her hand. It looks that way. The police found her diary. She's been planning to sabotage my engagement. Allie's eyes filled with tears. Why? Why would she do that? She's not well, Allie. I think she hasn't been for a long time. But I never saw it, Allie whispered. She was always so normal with me. So loving. I squeezed her hand. That's because you were the good daughter who did everything she wanted. I was the one who fought back, who left. I didn't know it was that bad for you, Allie admitted. I thought you were just being dramatic when you complained about her. The hurt of that statement, of years being dismissed as dramatic when I was actually being abused, hit hard. But this wasn't the time for that conversation. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that you're okay and that Mom gets help. Allie looked at me with new understanding. You saved me, you know. The doctor said with my lower body weight, if I'd had the full dose she intended for you, it could have been much worse. I hadn't considered that, how my split-second decision might have actually prevented an even greater tragedy. The thought was sobering. We sat in silence for a moment, two sisters recalibrating their shared history in light of new revelations. What happens now? Allie finally asked. I don't know, I answered honestly, but things can't go back to the way they were. As if on cue, there was a commotion in the hallway. Raised voices, one of them unmistakably our mother's, echoed through the door. I demand to see my daughter. Mom was saying. This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong. The door burst open, and there she was, Elizabeth Sullivan, perfectly put together despite the circumstances, her face a mask of righteous indignation that faltered only slightly when she saw Allie and me together. It was time for the confrontation I'd been avoiding my entire life. Allison, darling, are you all right? Mom rushed to Allie's bedside, completely ignoring me. This whole situation is a terrible misunderstanding. Allie shifted away from her touch, a subtle movement that didn't go unnoticed. Mom's eyes narrowed slightly before her expression smoothed back into concern. Mom, I said firmly, standing my ground. We need to talk about what happened. There's nothing to discuss, Cassandra. Clearly someone at the catering company made a dreadful mistake. Her voice was perfectly controlled, reasonable. It was the voice she'd used my entire life to make me doubt my own perceptions. The police found your diary, I said quietly. The change was instantaneous. Mom's carefully composed face froze, a flicker of panic crossing her features before she recovered. That's private property. They had no right. They had every right, James said from the doorway where he'd been listening. Your daughter was poisoned. Poisoned? Mom laughed, the sound brittle. That's absurdly dramatic. It was a mild sedative, nothing dangerous. The admission hung in the air. We all stared at her, the pretense of innocence shattered by her own words. So you did put something in the wine, Allie said, her voice small and hurt. You just admitted it. Mom seemed to realize her mistake. She backtracked quickly. I meant hypothetically. If anything was in the wine, which I'm not saying there was. Stop lying, I interrupted, years of pent-up frustration breaking through. Stop manipulating. Stop gaslighting us all. Just stop, Mom. How dare you speak to me that way, she hissed, her mask slipping further. After everything I've done for you? What exactly have you done for me? I asked. Criticized me? Controlled me? Made me feel like I was never good enough. I pushed you to be your best, she countered. If it weren't for me, you'd have settled for mediocrity. If it weren't for you, I might have actually believed in myself, I shot back. Nathan was the first person who made me feel worthy of love without conditions, and you couldn't stand it. Mom's face contorted with anger. Nathan is wrong for you. He's weak. He lets you make your own decisions, encourages your ridiculous independence. He's destroying everything I built. Everything you built? I echoed incredulously. You mean the prison of expectations you trapped me in? The constant criticism? The impossible standards? I was making you strong. You were breaking me down. And when you couldn't control me anymore, you tried to drug me at my own engagement party. Mom's composure cracked completely. It was just supposed to make you sick enough to go home early. To miss that ridiculous after-party his friends planned where they were going to convince you to move the wedding to Chicago. The specificity of the statement stunned me. How did you know about that? We didn't tell you about the after-party. A trapped look crossed her face. I have my ways of knowing things. You read my texts, I realized. When I went to the bathroom, you checked my phone. She didn't deny it. Instead, she switched tactics, turning to Allie. Allison, surely you understand. I was protecting our family, keeping us together. Cassandra was going to move even farther away, start a new family that didn't include us. Allie shook her head slowly. Mom, I moved to Seattle. I started my own family with James. That's normal. That's healthy. That's different, Mom insisted. You visit regularly. You call every week. You include me in your life. Because you never made me feel guilty for having my own life, Allie said with dawning realization. You love the version of me you created. You hate the version of Cassie that escaped your control. Mom's face flushed with anger. You have no idea what you're talking about. Neither of you do. The monitor tracking Allie's heart rate began beeping faster. James moved immediately to her side, concern evident. You need to leave, he told Mom firmly. You're upsetting my wife, who is here because of you. This is a family matter, Mom said dismissively. I am family, James replied. And right now, I'm asking you to leave before I call security. Mom looked to Dad, who had been standing silently in the doorway. Harold, say something. Dad straightened his shoulders, something I'd rarely seen him do in Mom's presence. Elizabeth, that's enough. You need help. Help, she scoffed. I'm the only one thinking clearly here. Cassandra is making a terrible mistake, and none of you can see it. The only mistake I made was letting you control my life for so long, I said quietly, and inviting you to be part of my engagement. Mom's eyes widened, her breathing becoming erratic. You don't mean that. You need me. You've always needed me. No, Mom. You needed me to need you. There's a difference. Something in her seemed to snap. She lunged toward me, grabbing my shoulders. You ungrateful, selfish girl. After everything I've sacrificed for you. Nathan and Dad both moved at once, pulling Mom away from me. She fought against their restraint, her carefully constructed image completely shattered as she shouted accusations and threats. A security guard appeared in the doorway, followed by a nurse. What's going on here? This woman tried to assault my fiancé, Nathan explained, still holding Mom's arm. She's also the one who drugged her other daughter, the patient. The security guard spoke into his radio, requesting police presence. Mom's struggles increased. This is ridiculous. I am Elizabeth Sullivan. Do you know who I am in this community? Her hysteria only confirmed what we were all now seeing clearly, a woman who had hidden severe mental illness behind a facade of perfectionism and control for decades. The police arrived minutes later, the same detectives who had interviewed us earlier. After assessing the situation, they informed Mom she was being taken into custody on suspicion of attempted poisoning. "You can't do this to me," she said, but her voice had lost its commanding edge, replaced by something closer to fear. "Harold, don't let them do this." Dad looked at her with profound sadness. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I should have gotten you help years ago." As they led her away, Mom locked eyes with me one last time. "This isn't over, Cassandra. You'll see I was right." The room fell silent after she left. Allie was crying quietly, James holding her hand. Dad stood motionless, looking lost. Nathan's arm around my waist was the only thing keeping me upright. "I never thought it would end like this," Dad finally said. "It hasn't ended," I replied. "This is just the beginning of a different chapter." That night in the hospital waiting room, as Allie slept under observation and Mom spent her first night in police custody, I finally allowed myself to break down. Nathan held me as years of suppressed pain poured out. "I should have seen it coming," I sobbed. "All the signs were there." "This isn't your fault," Nathan said firmly. "You couldn't have predicted this." "But I knew something was wrong with her." "I've always known." "Knowing something and being able to prevent it are different things," he said. "You did the right thing when it mattered most. You trusted your instincts, and you likely saved both yourself and Allie from worse harm." As my tears subsided, I felt something unexpected, a sense of liberation mixed with the grief. The truth, as painful as it was, had finally broken through decades of pretense. And in that broken open space, maybe genuine healing could begin. The weeks following what the family now referred to simply as the incident unfolded like scenes from someone else's life. Mom underwent psychiatric evaluation while in custody, resulting in a diagnosis that explained so much: narcissistic personality disorder with paranoid features, exacerbated by untreated anxiety. The district attorney charged her with attempted poisoning and assault. Her lawyer immediately began building a case around diminished mental capacity, while our family grappled with what justice would look like in this situation. "The DA wants to know if you'll testify," Dad told me over coffee in a neutral downtown location. He'd lost weight, the strain of recent events evident in the new lines on his face. "They say your testimony would strengthen their case considerably." "And if I don't?" I asked. He sighed heavily. "The charges might be reduced. Elizabeth could potentially serve minimal time, possibly just probation with mandatory psychiatric treatment." The decision weighed on me. Part of me wanted accountability, consequences for years of emotional abuse culminating in that final dangerous act. Another part recognized my mother was ill, had likely been ill for most of my life. "What would you do?" I asked Dad. He stared into his coffee cup. "I failed you girls by enabling her behavior for decades. I'm not the person to advise you on this." "You're still my father," I said quietly. He looked up, eyes damp. "Then as your father, I'll say this. Whatever you decide needs to be for your healing, not for punishment or revenge. Those won't bring you peace." Nathan's parents had invited us to stay with them while in Portland, offering a sanctuary from the media attention the case had attracted. Local news had picked up the story, prominent society woman drugs daughter at engagement party, and reporters had begun calling my work and Nathan's. "We should go back to Chicago," I told Nathan one evening. "I can't hide here forever." "Are you sure you're ready?" he asked, concerned. "No," I admitted. "But I need to reclaim my life. And I need to use my journalism background to get ahead of the story before it defines me." Nathan smiled, the proud look that always made my heart skip. That's my Cassie. We decided to give one exclusive interview to a respected Portland journalist, telling our story on our terms. I was nervous but determined as the cameras set up in the Thompsons' living room. Just be honest, the journalist advised before we began. People connect with authenticity. So I was honest about growing up with a mother whose love was conditional, about escaping to build my own life, about the engagement party that exposed decades of dysfunction. I didn't vilify Mom, instead emphasizing her untreated mental health issues and the family's hope for her recovery. The piece aired a week later to a sympathetic response. Messages of support flooded my social media, many from people with similar family experiences. Rather than feeling exposed, I felt validated. Meanwhile, Ali and I were rebuilding our relationship, recognizing how Mom had deliberately driven us apart through comparison and favoritism. I always envied how brave you were, Ali admitted during one of our new weekly phone calls. How you stood up to her, moved away, became your own person. And I envied how she loved you, I confessed. How she approved of your choices, celebrated your accomplishments. She controlled me in different ways, Ali said thoughtfully. With praise instead of criticism, but control nonetheless. I'm only now recognizing it. James and Nathan had formed their own alliance, the two men who loved the Sullivan sisters supporting each other through the family crisis. They arranged a weekend getaway for the four of us at a coastal cottage, away from legal discussions and family drama. Walking along the beach with Ali while our partners prepared dinner, I felt closer to my sister than ever before. Do you think Mom will ever change? She asked, watching the waves. I don't know, I answered honestly. Personality disorders are difficult to treat, especially when the person doesn't fully accept their diagnosis. Dad's filing for divorce, Ali said. Did he tell you? I nodded. After 40 years. I can't imagine how hard that decision was. He's looking at apartments. Asked for my help choosing furniture. She smiled slightly. He's never made those decisions before. He's finding himself, just a few decades late. We walked in comfortable silence for a while. I've been thinking about the wedding, I finally said. Nathan and I are considering something smaller. More intimate. Not the extravaganza Mom was planning? Ali teased. God, no. Maybe just close friends and family on the Chicago waterfront where he proposed. I think that sounds perfect. As legal proceedings continued, I started therapy to process my childhood and the recent trauma. My therapist specialized in adult children of narcissistic parents, helping me understand patterns I'd never recognized. You developed hypervigilance, she explained during one session. Always watching for signs of disapproval, anticipating criticism before it came. That's why you sensed something was wrong with the wine when others might have missed it. Your survival instincts were highly tuned. So my anxiety actually saved me? I asked. Your awareness did, she corrected. And now you can channel that awareness more healthily, without the constant fear. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early September. I flew to Portland, Nathan by my side, to give my deposition. Mom would be present, our first encounter since the hospital confrontation. She looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes replaced by something simple and beige, her hair lacking its usual perfect styling. Our eyes met across the conference room, and I was surprised to feel pity rather than fear or anger. Her lawyer had negotiated a plea deal, guilty on reduced charges, mandatory psychiatric treatment, probation, and a restraining order preventing contact with me unless I initiated it. It was as fair an outcome as possible, I thought, consequences paired with treatment. When asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I declined. What could I possibly say that would change anything now? As we left the courthouse, a reporter called out, "Cassandra, do you forgive your mother?" I paused, considering. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process, I finally replied. Right now, I'm focused on healing. Back in Chicago, Nathan and I resumed wedding planning, this time on our terms. A small ceremony, 40 guests maximum, with Madison as my maid of honor and Allie as a bridesmaid. No elaborate decorations or society expectations, just authentic celebration. "Are you inviting your mother?" Madison asked hesitantly while helping me choose a simple white dress that felt right. "No," I said without regret. "The restraining order prevents it, but honestly, I wouldn't anyway. This day needs to be free from that anxiety." "And your dad?" I smiled. "Yes, he's walking me down the aisle. He's different now, going to therapy himself, learning to be more present. It's like meeting a new version of my father." 6 months after the engagement party, our lives had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. Mom was in a residential treatment facility, Dad was learning independence in his small Portland apartment, and Allie and I spoke almost daily, our relationship stronger through shared understanding. Nathan and I had emerged stronger too. "You know," he said one night as we finalized our guest list, "I fell in love with you because of your strength. Now I've seen exactly how strong you really are." I kissed him, grateful beyond words for his unwavering support. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" "More than okay," he promised. "We're going to be extraordinary." And for the first time in my life, I believed that future was possible, a life defined not by fear and approval seeking, but by genuine love and hard-won wisdom. On a perfect October afternoon 6 months after the engagement party that changed everything, Nathan and I stood beneath a flower-covered arch on the Chicago waterfront, exchanging vows surrounded by the people who truly loved us. Madison and Heather beamed from the bridal party, while Allie stood proudly as my matron of honor, her relationship with me now built on mutual respect rather than our mother's manipulations. Dad walked me down the aisle, sober in more ways than one. Weekly therapy and a support group for partners of people with personality disorders had helped him find his voice. When he placed my hand in Nathan's, he spoke clearly, "I give my blessing to this union of equals." For simple words that acknowledged the healthy relationship Nathan and I had built, something he and Mom never had. Elizabeth Sullivan was not present, physically or spiritually. The restraining order remained in effect, but more importantly, I had finally built the emotional boundaries I'd needed my entire life. She continued treatment at a private psychiatric facility, sending occasional letters through her lawyer. Some expressed remorse, others revealed she still couldn't fully accept responsibility. I read them, acknowledged them, and filed them away, no longer allowing her words to dictate my emotional state. After our honeymoon in Portugal, Nathan and I settled into our Chicago apartment, planning a future based on mutual support and honest communication. We discussed having children someday, both committed to breaking the cycles of dysfunction that had shaped my childhood. "I'm terrified of becoming her," I admitted one night. "You won't," Nathan said with certainty. "You're already doing the work to make sure of that." The work he referred to as ongoing therapy, boundary setting, and conscious awareness of inherited patterns. I'd learned that healing isn't a destination, but a practice, something that requires daily commitment and self-compassion. Allie and James visited regularly, our sisterhood flourishing now that we understood how we'd been pitted against each other. "It's like I have a new sister," she told me during one visit, but with all our shared history intact. Dad called weekly, slowly becoming the father he could have been if he hadn't surrendered his agency to Mom's dominating personality. He joined a hiking club, was learning to cook, and had even begun dating, tentatively, awkwardly, but with genuine enthusiasm for this new chapter. As for me, I found my voice professionally as well as personally. The article I wrote about family trauma and recovery was published in a major magazine, launching a series on mental health that resonated with thousands of readers. Messages arrived daily from people who saw their own family dynamics reflected in my story. "You've turned pain into purpose," my therapist observed during one of our now monthly sessions. "I had to," I replied. "Otherwise, what was it all for?" The lesson I carried forward wasn't what I'd expected. It wasn't about villains and victims, or even forgiveness in the traditional sense. It was about understanding that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are themselves deeply wounded. Mom's behavior, while inexcusable, stemmed from untreated mental illness and likely generational trauma she never addressed. This understanding didn't erase the harm or obligation me to maintain unhealthy relationships. Instead, it freed me from the cycle of anger and hurt that had defined so much of my life. I could acknowledge her humanity while protecting my well-being. I could wish her healing without sacrificing my own. The deepest lesson, though, was about trusting myself. If I hadn't listened to that instinct about the wine, that quiet voice warning something was wrong, the outcome could have been devastating. My mother had spent decades training me to doubt my perceptions, to prioritize her reality over my own. In that crucial moment, I chose to trust myself instead. Now I make that choice daily. I listen to my intuition. I honor my boundaries. I surround myself with people who see me clearly and love me completely. Sometimes family is who you choose, not who you're born to. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the ones that hurt initially but heal ultimately. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is acknowledge that a relationship is toxic, especially when it's with someone who should have loved you unconditionally. I don't know if Mom and I will ever have a healthy relationship. That depends on her journey as much as mine. What I do know is that I'm no longer waiting for her approval or living in fear of her criticism. My worth isn't determined by her perception. My happiness isn't contingent on her acceptance. That, perhaps, is the most profound freedom of all. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself from someone who is supposed to care for you? Has your intuition ever saved you from a dangerous situation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember, sharing our experiences helps others feel less alone in their struggles. And if my story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to trust their instincts and set boundaries, even with family. Thank you for listening, and remember, your story matters, your feelings are valid, and you deserve relationships that bring peace, not pain.